The following program is brought to you courtesy of a grant provided by the Bank of Princeton.
Good evening, I'm Lou Goldstein and welcome to another edition of Focus On. Tonight my guest is Ruth Mandel, who is the director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics and professor of politics at Rutgers. Ruth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. As Eagleton director, Ruth has guided the Institute's development of initiatives in youth political engagement, immigrant political behavior, the study of governors and state executive leadership, and ethics in government. During her tenure, Eagleton educational programs for Rutgers graduate and undergraduate students have grown, and the Institute has expanded its state and national outreach and service with highly visible public programs and internet communications. During 3 administrations, Ruth held a presidential appointment on the governing board of the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, where she served as vice chair from 1993 to 2005. Her board service has included the Charles Revson Foundation, the National Council for Research on Women, the National Commission for the Renewal of American Democracy, Princeton University's Center for Jewish Life, the Mercer County Commission on the Status of Women, and various publications. She holds a BA in English from Brooklyn College and an MA and PhD in American Literature from the University of Connecticut, as well as receiving honorary doctorates from Chatham College and Georgian Court University right here in Lakewood, New Jersey. So Ruth, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I know we wanted to get right to it and talk to our audience during this holiday season about Eagleton, its mission, and its purpose. So maybe you could tell everybody about what Eagleton does for those who may not be familiar with it.
I'd be delighted. Eagleton was established in the middle of the last century. It's actually in a very old, beautiful mansion, but the modern program was established because of a bequest from a woman named Florence Peshine Eagleton, who lived in Newark and was active in actually in the suffrage movement, and then was a founding member and an officer in the League of Women Voters when women got the right to vote. Passage of the 19th Amendment. Many of the activists believed that they should now focus on educating themselves so that they would be the best kind of responsible citizens and voters. So she was a leader in that. She left money to, in her will, to the university to establish educational programs for encouraging young people to participate in the democracy. She was interested in reaching male and female students and having them learn something about participation. So that's what she valued from her experience. Eagleton was established in the mid-1950s, so it's over a half a century. It's 55 years old, actually. And it has always focused on American politics, and it has always taken very seriously a core education mission, even though in the Rutgers complex it's one of quite a number of what we call CBIs, Centers, Bureaus, and Institutes, and these are research entities at the university that focus on specialized certain subject areas with expertise. Usually, most of them are in the sciences, and they are not the same as the colleges and the schools, so we don't give a degree. What we do is we pursue research, and at Eagleton what we do is we connect the study of politics with the practice. So we're an institute of applied politics, and the courses that we offer, the students who come there, the researchers who are there, and the public service, all has to do with linking the study to the practice. And we bring lots and lots of practitioners to our programs and to our classes. They teach our classes, they come and lecture. Students have an opportunity to talk to leaders in an informal way, learn from them directly, behind the scenes kind of open, honest conversation. So it's a very active place, and I'd be happy to say more about it, but as you can tell, I can go on for a long time.
I'm sure. Hopefully we'll get to some of those
Sure.
areas that we will want to talk about. I know the Rutgers Eagleton Poem was established 40 years ago, and is one of the nation's first university-based statewide public opinion polls. I know a lot of newspapers use it and see it often in the papers. How are the polls conducted? How was it established? You know, who does the polls? And can you tell us a little bit about the polling methods that are utilized?
Sure. One of our centers at the Institute is called the Center for Public Interest Polling, and among its programs and projects is something called the Rutgers Eagleton Poll. When that was established in 1971, it was the first statewide public opinion poll at a university-based nonprofit public opinion poll. Now there are many, not only around the country, but also in New Jersey. We have polls everywhere. Everyone has seen the value in, and people's interest, just as you're asking the question, people's interest in polling. From the beginning, we've done polling about political candidates and campaigns, but also issues, and have a now 40-year database of New Jersey public opinion, what the citizens of this state think about the people who are running up for office, the people who hold office, the public policy issues on their minds. And then sometimes we do something, as we did just this week, we released something about people's Thanksgiving plans. So we do that too. We ask them also why they like living in the Garden State. But the way in which you measure a public opinion poll, the kind of public opinion poll we do, is very closely connected with campaigns. Because how do you know when you read the results of a poll and it says so many people, such a percentage believes this and such a percentage believes that? How do you know how accurate that is?
Yeah.
Well, the predictive accuracy is the horse race measure. So in some sense, that's the last thing we want to be doing, is measuring the horse races. But in another sense, it's a way of checking in to see how good our samples are, how well we're doing in getting people to respond. By the way, it's very, very difficult now. It's changed a lot over the years. It's very difficult to do the old-fashioned kind of public opinion polling, because that was telephone surveys.
Yeah.
And now many fewer people have landlines. They don't answer their phones. They're over-polled. They don't want to talk to pollsters. And many people only have cell phones. That's much, much more difficult for us to get the numbers and to make the contact. And the other challenge that's developed and is particularly interesting in New Jersey is we are one of the most diverse states in the nation. That is, we have a large number of immigrant populations, foreign-born populations in New Jersey. So second language issues, English-speaking issues, this is another challenge in polling. You asked who runs the poll. It's run by, now it's a number of professors over the 40 years, but most recently a professor of political science, Dave Redlosk, who came to the Institute a couple of years ago to take over as director of that center and of the poll, and who had spent about 10 years. He actually had gotten his PhD in New Jersey at Rutgers, but he spent 10 years in Iowa, which is a place, if you want to be a pollster, it's heaven. And he established something 4 years ago in the last election cycle called the Hawkeye poll in Iowa. And they did presidential national campaign polling in Iowa, and then he moved over here. So now he's asking New Jerseyans about our governor and our legislature. And
what is he finding out?
Finding out what the other polling operations in New Jersey are finding out, which is that the governor is doing pretty well in people's minds. He's got, given how tough talking he is, given how much controversy, given how blunt he's been, people still seem to respond to what his candor, his directness, his forcefulness. So he's doing pretty well in the polls.
Okay. And does the pollsters at Eagleton also make up the questions, or how they derive?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, these are people who are highly trained political scientists and very experienced in survey research methodology. They teach this. They're academics who teach courses in research methodology and survey research. And right now, we have our own call center. For some years, in the early years of the poll, we had one, and then it got to be too complicated and expensive, and so we shifted to contracting out to a call center. You know, we would prepare the surveys, and shifting out to a call center, that got very expensive. But more important, we really believed that the value for our students, the educational value in learning how to be a pollster, in learning how to ask those questions, was important enough that we would find some way to rebuild the polling center. So we have, Eagleton is, I think I mentioned, most of our offices and classrooms are in a big mansion, an old mansion on the Douglas College, now Douglas campus side of Rutgers. And next to this mansion we have a carriage house, which is also part of Eagleton, and the call center is in the carriage house, and students are being trained in doing these surveys.
That's great. That's great. I just want to move on to another program that's at Eagleton. I know former governors, Brendan Byrne and Tom Kean, co-chair of the Center of the American Governor, and I thought maybe you could give a little explanation about what that does.
Well, from its earliest days, Eagleton, one of its special areas has been state politics and government. A national perspective, also New Jersey, of course, but a national perspective. And the focus for many, many years was on, and continues to be, state legislatures. We have the former director of Eagleton, who's still a professor there. Alan Rosenthal is renowned. We always joke that if you go to the National Conference of State Legislatures annual meeting with thousands and thousands of people, when Alan walks into the room, it's like Elvis has arrived. He's very, very well known all over the country for the work that he's done in studying state legislatures, and we do it the same way we do everything at Eagleton, and that is very close to the practice. It's not focused on the theory. The political scientists in the disciplines, in the departments, in the PhD training focus on theory. We take the theory and apply it, focus on the practice, deal with the practitioners. So he has been, and people who've worked with him, a student of legislatures for decades. And a few years ago we decided that state government, there's an important side called the executive branch. We've always had some relationship with that as well in our studies. But we thought that it would be important to look at governors, and there were a couple of very specific reasons. One is that Governor Byrne wanted to leave some of his personal papers to the university. All the governor's papers automatically are in Trenton, in the state archives for all governors, but there are personal documents as well. And so it began with some of Brendan Byrne's papers, and then Governor Kean's. And so one aspect of it deals with the governors of New Jersey, and we have sections. This is a virtual center. When we talk about the Center on the American Governor, it's a virtual center that we're building. There are sections on the recent New Jersey governors. At the moment, the ones that are up and running are Governor Byrne, Governor Kean. We're having a colloquium next week on the opening of the Governor Florio archive, and we will have one in the spring for Governor Whitman, and moving forward. But probably the most interesting and in some ways important issue for us in building this center is it is a fact that if you want to study the governor in the United States, the role of the governor, the role of the state executive, you would be hard-pressed to find a course. You would be hard-pressed to find a professor. You would be hard-pressed to find a lot of literature. This is not a subject that's been paid attention to and focused on. So this center we're building on the American Governor, and as I say, it's a virtual center, so if you're in Idaho and you want to look at what we've got online, you can use it for your research or your teaching. This center is really doing what we've done with other areas at Eagleton over the years. It's fulfilling a need for a subject that has been neglected, that's been overlooked. And 17 governors have gone on to be President of the United States. If you look at the Republican field right now, among the people who are running for the nomination, former governors, many of them. So it's a really important office, not only in our state, but historically and nationally. And we think we're performing a public service, an educational service. The main thing is, though, for us as a challenge, is that it takes resources to do this, and we just need somebody to come along and endow it with a couple of $1 million so we can really build it, the back end of the technology for it, hold national conferences. How do governors deal with crises? Katrina, 3 Mile, 9/11. These are all issues that governors have to deal with. Bringing them together to talk about those kinds of things, videotaping those discussions, which is what we do with everything now, and we put it up on the site. That kind of service, we believe, is from a research point of view and an education point of view, is something that we have an obligation to perform. So it's an exciting new area for us.
That's good. And if anybody's out there who's watching has some, money that they want to endow, I'm sure Ruth is willing to, talk to you.
I'd clear my schedule.
There we go.
Happy to talk to them. It's serious. I mean, we've had some support, and we're applying for research money. There are a lot of different components in that project, and so there are lots of opportunities as we go forward.
I know the role of women has changed over the years in politics. You mentioned getting the right to vote all the way through the present time, and I know there's a center for the American women in politics at Rutgers, and I think Eagleton has a role in that too.
Well, not only a role in it, it is the reason that I'm at Eagleton. I mean, I came to Eagleton when that center was established, and I was its director for many years and developed it, and I stepped down as director when I became director of the Institute as a whole. But the Center for American Women and Politics is one of the units at the Eagleton Institute. Like our survey center, it's 40 years old now. It was established in 1971. It is the national research resource center for the study of women's participation in politics. It has an extraordinarily valuable website with information that's used by journalists across the country. It's very rare that you'll see a story about women in politics, candidates, office holders, when numbers are used, statistics are used. It's very rare that our center won't be cited as the source for that. We've done everything. I mean, we've held national conferences of elected women. We've conducted national research projects about whether women in office make a difference. There's a big project now. The current director of the center, a very active and effective woman, her name is Debbie Walsh. She's been at Eagleton for not as long as I have, but for several decades now. But she's actually a young woman, and she's going around the country right now with something called the 2012 Project, part of a national effort to encourage women to take advantage of the every 10-year redistricting opportunities, the open seats, the changes that are taking place in the states, and consider a candidacy. So we encourage women to run, we educate young women. There's a program called New Leadership we designed and established at Eagleton, at Rutgers, but it's now replicated in over 20 states around the country. That's also true of another workshop called, an educational program called Ready to Run. So it is, that center is thriving, and it's had an enormous impact. And you know what? When we started that center, the subject of women in politics didn't exist, just as I'm saying about governors. No one studied it, there weren't any books, there weren't any courses, and now it's everywhere, and we've had some part in that, and we're very proud of it.
But there seems to be a growing influence now of women in politics, and I don't know if that equates to more women running for political office, or just having that base from which that interest generates upward. So nationally, how do you think that looks? Are more women getting involved in running, for political office?
Well, compared to when we started in 1971, we took a head count, kind of census, and women were below 5% of all elected officials, whether you looked at the local school boards or councils, or up the system to the national level. So there's been a big change. There's been a big change in women's self-perceptions. That is, they consider themselves now appropriate for political office and political leadership. That wasn't the case when I was growing up. It wasn't the case before the women's movement, the women's movement of the 1970s and 80s brought this subject to everyone's attention. And women began to notice that they weren't there, and that when they went during the big fight in the 1970s and 80s for the Equal Rights Amendment, women across the country would go to their state legislatures, activists would go to argue for passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, and they'd come back and they'd say, hey, we went there are no women in the legislature, but we saw what goes on there, we can do that too. And they began to feel empowered and interested, but you know what? It's a world that for centuries has been populated by men. You think of the word leader and the image of a man still springs to mind. So moving into that non-traditional area, most men who are in office and in power are not stepping aside to say, gee, I think I'll just go do something else so women get a chance. So it's a very slow process, and I must point out that you say, well, is it different? Yeah, it's different, but when I said that in 1971 women were fewer than 5% of all elected officials, today in the Congress of the United States, 17%, 17 women in the United States Senate, almost 17% of the House of Representatives, 6 women governors out of 50. So the numbers are still very small. The progress has been significant in our attitude about women leaders. It's been significant even in the numbers, but it's very incremental, and frankly, it's been a little stalled in the last 5 or 10 years.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier, just to shift gears, you had mentioned earlier about the growing ESL population, growing ELL population, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the program on immigration and democracy,
yes,
and for our listeners, and a little bit also about the youth political participation.
Sure, those 2 program areas are newer programs, more recently established programs at the Institute. The program on, Eagleton's program on immigration and democracy is in its early years. It has done some very interesting research about organizations, communities and organizations in New Jersey that serve foreign-born population. We have at the university, we have a very large foreign-born student population, also in the state. I'll tell you something that we did just last week, which was wonderful. The program, there's a young woman, actually lives here in Princeton, named Anastasia Mann, who is an assistant research professor at the Institute, and she directs the program now. She set up a naturalization ceremony at the Institute. Yeah. And the naturalization service sent the officers in, and it was a full-scale ceremony. 34 people were naturalized in the drawing room of the Institute, and it was the first time ever at Rutgers University that this took place. And it followed on the heels of another program that she established, which is a program to help foreign-born, not citizens, foreign-born residents begin to go through the process of applying for citizenship. These are people who are eligible to apply for citizenship, but very often they don't take the steps. It's a little bureaucratic, it's a little complicated, it's a little off-putting, it's even somewhat, there are some expenses involved, and you need legal advice sometimes. And she has established, now has conducted at the various campuses at Rutgers, a program that the City University of New York was at the forefront of establishing, and that is making lawyers available, services available to inform people what steps to take, how to go through the process of applying for naturalization. And you know, when they held this program on the campus, they've held one in Newark and one in Camden. Some of the people who showed up are actually faculty members at the university, people who've been here a long time and are full-fledged, active members of the community, but they have never gone through the process. They're not illegal in any way. They're here quite legally. Yeah. They've just never taken those steps. So we've done 2 things now. One is try to help them take those steps, and 2, hold this naturalization ceremony.
That's very
It's been
exciting.
very nice.
Yeah, it is
very
nice.
nice.
That is very nice.
Yeah. The Youth Political Participation Program
Right.
you asked about, that's also a little bit, it's been at the Institute a little bit longer. After I became director of the Institute, I thought that it was very important for us to make a special point about the ways in which young people can and should participate. Going back to what I told you about Florence Eagleton, also the president of Rutgers, who's now going to step down, but he's been there for 10 years, and when he arrived, he made a big point of saying that he thought Rutgers students should be engaged and be voters if they were eligible to vote, that they should participate, take advantage of the franchise opportunity. And so our youth political participation program is very active on campus with something called Are You Voting? Educating our students about how to go about the process of registering and voting and encouraging students to vote and educating them about given elections, whenever, every year is an election in New Jersey, so
Right.
there's never a year that we don't have
Every
an
day
Are
seems
You
to be
Voting?
election, yeah. Every day's
Yeah.
a poll about an election. Yeah.
Right, so we do that, and then she's another assistant research professor, Elizabeth Matos. She's also conducting something called Are You Ready, which is a program to educate high school students, working in this case with New Brunswick High School. That has been, we take Rutgers students into the high school and use them as peer mentors and spend the whole year in a program to educate these young students in New Brunswick. We bring them to the Institute. And then the other thing that program area has been involved with, and I was very active with in 2003, I wanted to know at the beginning of the 21st century, who was at the table. I wanted to know, if you pictured the table of young people in politics as large as a football field, who was sitting there at the beginning of the 21st century? Because one of the things that we know is that if you look at the presidents of the United States or the governors or the senators and you ask the question, how old were they when they held their first office? Not the presidency, not the governorship, but their first office.
Right.
Many of them were age 35 and under. So we went out at the beginning of this new century to try to identify the young elected officials 35 and under and take a look at what that would tell us about these might be the governors of the future, the senators, the Congress people, right? So we did a national kind of a census and then a survey, a research project, and then we brought about 50 of them to Eagleton for a weekend and talked to them and had a conference, and then we issued a report called Political Generation Next. And we are interested in continuing to follow that population. I'll end that by telling you that one of the people, you never know who's going to be in that group, one of the people who was a state legislator at the time,
Yeah.
under 35, came to that conference, Gabrielle Giffords.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you just never know.
You never know.
Now she's back on the floor and seems to be recovering
Well,
nicely.
she's not on the floor yet.
Oh, she seems to be recovering nicely, though. Yeah.
Really miraculously so
Unbelievable.
far. Yeah.
But that's nice that she was there, and it's a great study that you're doing, and hopefully, who knows, the next governor or president, down the road, it may
Never
not
know.
be another 100 years. Since
One of the
Woodrow Wilson. You
privileges
never
of
know.
doing the work that we do with women in politics, young people, is we get to watch the world from our little perch in New Brunswick as it's changing, the political world, and meet some of the people who go on to do some of the things that we're most proud of.
Beautiful.
And sometimes things we're not proud of.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on today, Ruth. It was great, and hearing about Eagleton and what it does, and hopefully we'll have a chance down the road to talk a little bit more, about Eagleton and the accomplishments and everything that you've done for Eagleton, which has been legendary and much appreciated by everybody.
Thank you very much.
So this is Lou Goldstein for Focus On, saying thank you very much for watching. So stay involved, stay active, stay focused, and we'll see you next week on another edition of Focus On.
This program was brought to you through a grant provided by the Bank of Princeton.